Hello everyone, I welcome you to online class being offered by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University, and I'm your host and academic counselor SM Fasiullah. We'll be discussing topics from the course 7, that is aspects of language and their relation to literature. Excuse me. In our previous classes, we talked about Indian literature and the relationship between language and literature, and host of other things, including Indian literary traditions. As per the requests that came up in the last class, today we will be talking about language of literature, right? And in order to do so, we'll be looking at what kind of language is being used in, say, poetry and prose and other forms of literature. Okay, I hope you are able to hear me clearly, and you are able to also see the screen that I'm sharing.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Just a second. Yes, to begin with, we know that for the fact that anything that is printed could be considered as literature, but all that is printed cannot be considered literature, right? Because there are certain criteria that distinguish between what can be called literature and what cannot be called literature, right? And we know we are actually living in times where something that is published online, right, on the internet, may it be a blog or a Facebook post, right? Things like that, are also considered under literature, because it is published. It is in some cases it is self-published and all. And within literature now, orality, right, oral form of literature is also taken into consideration. These are the basics that we already know, so I don't want to spend much time on that, and we'll go directly and talk about the topic requested yesterday. And we also know that literature has that element of imagination, right? It's a form of expression, right? Things like that. Okay, now when it comes to literature, we know that literature is expressed in variety of forms, right? It is expressed as poetry, drama, fiction, non-fiction, epic, sonnet, blah 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 blah, right? And in literature, the language is not same as we see it in say in our day-to-day life, or in other areas of usage. Like, for example, if you go and check or if you happen to read a judgment, right, a court judgment, right, so you may not find the same language there in the court judgment, even though if it is English, that language would be completely different from the language that you see in poetry and in fiction and in other forms, right? So there are clear distinctions between the language that is used in some areas and the language that is used in literature. And what actually makes these things different? Why a language that we read in judiciary or in a research paper, scientific research paper, right, and the language that we see or we read in literature is different. What makes it different? Those are the things that we need to pay attention to, and that I think this is the first point from which we'll start our today's discussion. Okay, and we know that by now language experts distinguish between two different varieties of language, right? And they say that meaning resides at two different levels, right? One is connotative, the other is denotative, right? And I hope you are able to see that on the screen, right? Are you able to see that on the screen? Connotative and denotative.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So
Yes, sir.
Yeah, these are the two technical terms that we need to remember in order to distinguish between a language of literature and language of non-literature. You call it scientific language or judiciary language, whatever. Okay. So now what does connotative and denotative mean? If we understand these two terms, we understand the major difference between our language in a literature and language in non-literature. So we will start with denotative, right? Denotative language is basically a language which is objective, right? It is objective. On the contrary, we have connotative language which is subjective. We know these two terms, right? Subjective and objective, right? For example, if you are appearing for an examination where you have, say, for example, 4 options, A, B, C, D, right? And you just have to, bubble it or choose any of the appropriate one. And that is one form of, what we say, testing of you. And the other form of testing of you is, you have been given a question, define what it is, and you are writing something to explain it, right? To define it. Now, these are two different types of testing. First one is called objective testing or objective evaluation of the student, right? And the second one is called subjective evaluation, which means in the first case, there is no ambiguity. There is no possibility of multiple interpretations. It is direct, right? It is either correct or incorrect. It is either right or wrong. But in case of subjective one, where you have possibility of multiple interpretation, right? And if the student has written an entire paragraph in order to define or in order to respond to the question that is being asked, right? And the examiner may find one or two words relevant in the entire paragraph, and he thinks that yes, so this student has attempted tried his level best to define or to answer to this question, so let us pass him. But that kind of that kind of possibility will not be there in an objective exam. It is either pass or fail. Either it is correct or incorrect. So that is what the difference between objective and subjective. So when it comes to language, right, when we say denotative language, right, or scientific language, which is objective, it means it implies what it says. Got my point? For example, if I am saying apple, it means apple. That's it. But in a subjective language, right, if I am saying you are an apple of eye, there I don't mean apple. Do I mean apple in that? No. What rather I mean is, you are very dear to me. So that becomes a connotative language. That becomes a subjective meaning of the word or the sentence. In case of denotative language, no, such possibility is not there. And the language is very direct. You can also call it direct, right? This as indirect. And yesterday when we were talking about Vakrokti, right? So Vakrokti is more like literary language. It's actually language. It's actually indirect language. It's oblique language, right? It's a crooked language. Sorry, Vakrokti. Sorry. Vakrokti, right? So literary language is basically indirect one. It's an oblique or it's a crooked one. Right? You may not always mean what you say. But in case of a scientific language, you don't do that. It's very direct. It's very objective, right? You mean what you write. So this is the major difference between a literary language and a scientific language. I hope you got this point. Have you understood what I'm trying to explain regarding the difference between literary and scientific language?
Connotative and denotative.
Yes, you have to remember these two important terms: connotative and denotative. So literary language is connotative, which means it's a subjective language. Subjective, it means it's indirect. It means it's vakrokti, right? Whereas in case of scientific language, it is direct. It's denotative, direct, objective. So I have given here one example. For example, in literary usage of blue, right? You don't mean the color, you mean sad feeling. But when you use it in a scientific language, right, it means blue as color. It doesn't go beyond that. So denotative meaning of blue is it's a color. But connotative meanings could be so many. And one such meaning is, sad feeling. Okay. So if these two are, what we have understood to be different, that is literary and scientific language, then what kind of language we use in our day-to-day life? Is it connotative or is it denotative?
Denotative, sir.
Denotative? Are you sure?
Yes, sir. Because we don't use indirect, no, sir.
In our day-to-day language, we make use of a lot of idioms, a lot of proverbs.
That is true. Written, no, sir.
So if we are making use of a lot of idioms and what we say proverbs in communicating orally, right, in our day-to-day life, then are we not using literary language?
Yes, sir. Both we use, sir. Connotative as well as denotative.
Exactly. So practically we make use of both denotative and connotative forms of language. Right. So let's move on about how a normal language becomes language of literature. This I think actually I discussed in our offline class, but let's also briefly understand these things. So when we say a normal language, right, it is normal language. But when this normal language is turning into literary language, which means something is being added to it, isn't it? In the same fashion, say a normal bowl of rice would become biryani. But the biryani also contains rice. But there are so many other things that are added to it to make it biryani. In the same way, a normal language becomes a literary language with some additional things. What are those characteristics? What are those features? So one primary thing that makes a normal language a literary language is figures of speech. Now we know that there are so many figures of speech, right? Metaphor, simile, pun, these, that, blah, 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 blah. And these are the things we are already familiar with, but we have never realized that these are the these are the same figures of speech which is making a normal language a literary language. Now, what is a metaphor? A comparison between two things that are not like same, but do have something in common. Now, let's take example. The world is a stage. This is a metaphorical way of saying something. The world is a stage. We know that world is world and stage is stage, and a world cannot be a stage. But Shakespeare has made use of this expression, right, in a metaphorical way. So he's comparing world with the stage and the stage with world. But we know that this kind of comparison is very direct comparison. On the contrary, if it is a simile, what we would be saying, the world is like a stage. We will make use of like or as in comparing the two different things. So there are so many such figures of speech that changes a normal expression into an indirect one, an oblique one, or a vakroktik one. And that is why that denotative language turns into a connotative language. Let's take example of pun, right? It's basically a joke that makes a play on words. Okay. Example, the tallest building in the town is the library. It has thousands of stories. Now you see, you just pay attention to this one also, right? You're talking about building, and there is a mention of stories. So some kind of sense of humor is created here, right? A library is supposed to contain books, and it contains books, but we are talking about stories. Stories could mean two things, right? Stories could mean multi-story, right? Which means it has multiple levels. In a modern terminology, we say multiple what we say levels in any building, right? But here stories also mean kathalu, stories, right? So this dual meaning in it is creating a sense of humor. So this is one figure of speech. So many such figures of speech adds a special feature to the normal language, and thereby that normal language becomes language of literature. Because all these things, all these what we say figures of speech are what we say turning a denotative things into a connotative one, or changing a normal path into a deviant path. You're still going there, but not in a straight way, not in a straight way. You're taking different routes. And these are all indirect paths, right? Oblique or grouped paths. You are eventually meaning the same thing. Okay, your destination, your ultimate purpose is same, but unlike in a scientific language, which is normal and dry, you are enriching this language through figures of speech. You're adding a lot of flavor to the language through these figures of speech, and thereby making the language of literature tasty, easy to remember, right? To laugh at, to do a lot of things. Have you ever seen a person reading a scientific paper, laughing, smiling, crying? You hardly do that. But the language of literature has that potential to make its reader cry, laugh, become sad, become happy, even ROFL, isn't it? Now we know this, in one of the Shah Rukh Khan movies, he says, "बड़े बड़े शहरों में छोटी छोटी बातें हो जाती है senorita." Have you heard this dialogue?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge.
Very good. Excellent. Excellent. So DDLJ. So he says that dialogue some decades ago in a movie, right? But when these particular dialogue, that dialogue is very literary. It's in a literary language. It's not a what do we say, normal language. बड़े बड़े शहरों में छोटी छोटी बातें हो जाती है senorita. It is you see the rhythm in that, right? A beat in that, like the rhymes that we studied, we recited as children, and our own children do that. So it is the poetic piece. It's a poetic piece basically. The dialogue itself is a kind of verse. बड़े बड़े शहरों में छोटी छोटी बातें हो जाती है senorita. Now you see that when Barack Obama, the US president of that time, when he visits India, and in his speech, he begins, or he says, he brings up this dialogue, and he says, "बड़े बड़े शहरों में," all those. That's what he says. And the moment he utters this, "बड़े बड़े शहरों में छोटी छोटी," then everybody burst into laughter. Isn't it? If you have not watched that, you can watch that video later. So what I'm trying to see is that it is the potential of literary language to make you happy, cry, make you feel a lot of emotions. And that same thing is not possible in a scientific language. Scientific language is very dry. It is like annam pappu, but without rasam, without pickle, without papad and all those things. I hope I'm giving a relatable example to you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we'll move on, and then I hope by now you are clear about what makes a literary language, right? So let us move on to talk about one of the important topic at time and again asked in your examination. It's about ambiguity. What is ambiguity? The ambiguity is, in the previous case, we used the word stories, right? Now, stories there could mean at least two different things. So any word or any sentence which possibly can use more than one meaning, such a sentence or such a word is called ambiguous. And using that particular feature, writers deliberately, create some kind of, impression. Create some kind of sense to make you laugh, to make you confuse, and for different, variety of purposes. Now I'll write one example to you. I can fish. Now tell me what does this mean?
So please repeat, sir.
We get two meanings, sir. I can fish. That means you're going for fishing.
Mm-hmm.
And one more, I can fish, is like we say something like fishy.
The storing of fish in the pond.
Something suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of homonyms, sir. This is ambiguities.
Now, this entire sentence level, you get multiple meaning.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? What are the possible meanings? First, to know, when you say I can fish, right? This can, as a auxiliary, indicate your potential, which means you have the ability to
fish.
To fish, right? That is one meaning. I can fish means, yes, I know how to do it. I have that skill, right? I have that potential to execute the task, that is fish, right? Isn't it? Here, fish simply means, catch fish. Okay. Now, second meaning of this sentence is that, when you say I can fish, which means you take the fish, put it in a can. It's like, packaging process, storing process, and a packaging process, right? There are fish, you pick it, you put it in a container.
Container, yes, sir.
Right. So the second meaning is, about that. So this particular sentence has multiple meanings at sentence level, right? And the whole meaning is coming out of just one word. That ambiguity is because of one particular word in the sentence, right? The way we understood in case of stories, right? In libraries, you can find a lot of stories, but you can also find stories, lots, right? Multiple stories to read and to climb, to walk up. So regarding this ambiguity, now you understood what ambiguity is, right? Regarding this ambiguity, now we have one more interesting example here. I saw a man with telescope, right? Can you guess the meaning? Possible meanings of this particular sentence? Are you able to guess? I saw a man with telescope. First one possibly is, I saw a man with telescope. Yes.
I saw a man having telescope, or telescope having a...
Yes, excellent attempt. Which means, there is one person who has saw another person having a telescope, as the previous one responded as rightly said. Which means this man has the telescope and this person has saw, right? But the other meaning is, I saw a man with telescope, which means this first person has seen second person using a telescope, right? Are we getting these two different senses, meanings?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So this kind of, what we say, ambiguity is basically called, in terms of language, is called structural ambiguity. What is it called? Structural ambiguity. It means, this ambiguity is because of the structure, right? In the previous case, yes. So in the previous case, it was because of the word. Lexical, at lexical level, the ambiguity was there. And in this case, it's at structural level, right? The ambiguity is not because of saw, it's not because of man, it's not because of telescope. Each and every word in this structure, in this sentence, is giving only one clear meaning. Yet you have two possible, different, meanings at the sentence level. That is because of the structure. So ambiguity could be at a lexical level, that is word level, or at a structure level. Lexical ambiguity and structural ambiguity. Now, we have one particular, language expert whose name is William Emerson. Now, this gentleman says that, there are several types of ambiguity. In fact, he says, there are 7 types of ambiguity. Now, he says that ambiguity helps you see, you pay attention to this verb, right? Helps a statement to yield several meanings by keeping open meaning possibilities. Which means he's trying to say that, because ambiguity helps in, producing multiple, meanings, an author or the user of the language can make use of these, literary device to enhance his literary production, to enrich his, writing. That is what he's trying to point to. And then he says that, the way we understood lexical ambiguity, right? And the structural, right? Structural ambiguity, 2 different types. So he is trying to tell us, show us, 7 different types of ambiguities. Let's see what are those, right? And one important thing is trying to tell us that, metaphor and pun are the sources of ambiguity, which means when we saw in the previous cases, in the previous slide also, that, metaphor and pun are those, literary devices or those figures of speech which are making a normal language a literary language. So what Emerson is trying to tell us that, ambiguity that we are talking about, is actually benefiting from these 2 particular literary devices, right? Ambiguity itself is a literary device. We know that, right? But these ambiguity is, taking benefit of or taking, benefiting from, a metaphor and pun as, figures of speech. Now, what is irony? We know that, irony is, use of words to convey meaning that is opposite of its literal meaning. For example, you have asked a good question. This is a typical, statement you may come across in an academic, setting, in a seminar, in lecture, right? In places like that. But what does that actually imply? Are you the speaker really compliment the person who asked the question?
No.
Or he is embarrassed at the very question itself, but to hide his embarrassment, right? He is making use of this statement. You ask a question to a speaker whose answer he doesn't know, right? Or he is embarrassed at hearing such a question from you, or he didn't expect that this kind of a question would come, and then suddenly he has to respond to it in public, in front of people. So what he would do or she would do to contain that emotion and to get few seconds to think about that question, right? That speaker throws this question, this statement, you have asked a good question. That actually means it would have been good if you have not asked this question. Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So irony is what you say and what you mean are opposite. And Twitter as a platform is full of ironies. I don't know how, but unlike any other social media platform, may it be Facebook or any other, Twitter has this unique feature that the people who express their ideas, their emotions, right, or share information, they mostly use one particular figure of speech extensively, and that is irony. And when it comes to irony, we have three different types of irony. Verbal irony, which is using words, you create that opposite effect or contradictory statement. Situational irony is where in a situation, right, you see something you did not expect. For example, when we talk about fire station is supposed to dose fire, right, wherever it is started, isn't it? But if the fire station is, burned, then that is a situation you never expected as a listener or as a hearer. And there lies the irony. Fire station is burned down. So is the case with police station. If you say police is robbed off, doesn't that create irony? And you that gives a kind of amusement to you. Etla jarigindi. Police is supposed to protect others, and they themselves are being robbed. That is situational irony. And situational irony is being used by most of the Indian serial. You take any serial, you'll find this situational irony being used to create some kind of humor and laughter and amusement. And I think if I remember it correctly, Venu Madhav and you have that other Pramanandam, right? These are the actors who have earned name and fame because of their situational or dramatic irony. Other form of irony, that is dramatic irony. Audience knows something, characters don't know. Example, Hamlet's madness and Polonius. Hamlet, in Shakespeare's play Hamlet, doesn't know he is mad. But you and I, as reader of the drama or viewer of that drama, knows that Hamlet has some problem, that is madness. Are you with me, or have we lost connection?
Yes, sir.
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 So when we talk about irony, you please mention about Kenneth Brooks and his work, that is irony as a principle of structure. If you are asked a question on irony, right, you definitely mention Kenneth Brooks' name and his primary work, that is irony as a principle of structure. And you also talk about what irony is. You try to define what irony is, and then go on talking about three different types of irony: verbal irony, situational irony, and dramatic irony. Yeah, so we have one more important thing, that is functions of literature. And I think shall we take it up in the next class, or you want me to start it today itself?
So take in the next class.
Yeah, because we usually we go topic wise so that there would remain a clarity, right? And it is easy to remember also. So in this particular class, what we talked about is what makes a scientific what makes a literary language, and how literary language is different from scientific language. So whenever a question is asked to you about distinguish between or differentiate between literary language and scientific language, or you are just asked what is literary language and define it or explain it or things like that, or you have asked only two particular words, define connotative and denotative, whatever you are asked, you have to explain everything that we discussed here. A connotative language is basically a language of literature. It is connotative. It means there are possibilities of multiple meanings. It means it is subjective. It means it is indirect, right? And in Indian tradition, it is called Vakrokti. When it comes to scientific language, it is denotative. A denotative language means a language which is objective, which is direct, right? Which, what do we say? Which implies what it means, right? And give examples to support it. And also talk about, unlike literary language and scientific language, everyday language has features of both connotative and denotative language. Right? So this is an important question being asked time and again. And coming to how a normal language becomes a literary language, and what distinguishes between a normal language and everyday language, or literary language and an everyday language, or normal language or literary language. You can talk about usage of figures of speech that makes a normal language or a everyday language into a literary language. And you can give at least 2-3 examples of figures of speech, like metaphor, simile, pun, things like that. Okay. And whenever you are asked about ambiguity, you define what ambiguity is, and you try to define ambiguity at lexical level and ambiguity at structural level, and then talk about William Emerson, right? And what he says is the purpose of ambiguity. But actually, ambiguity helps a statement to yield several meanings by keeping open many possibilities. And then you talk about 7 types of ambiguities that is discussed by William Emerson. If you want to know what are those 7 types of ambiguity, you can go and check page number 49 in your SLM, that is self-learning material, and you have been given all those 7 types of ambiguities, 7 different types of ambiguity, and you have to write about those 7 types of ambiguity. Do you have the book with you?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
It is there on page number 49.
Yeah, it's on 49. So you say that Emerson talks about 7 types of ambiguity, and he says that pun and metaphor are sources of ambiguity. And then you say first type of ambiguity as a different point altogether. Then second type of ambiguity. This way you write about each type of ambiguity as a separate line. That would show that you have really understood this concept, and you have done required hard work to present the information in a very systematic way. And that is what distinguishes between you and other people who do last minute preparation. You attend classes, you know what the concept is, therefore you also know what is expected of you. Having information is one, and presenting that information in a very systematic way, right? In a eye-catching way, right? In an organized way, is also important as the concept is itself, as important as the answer itself that you are writing. Right? So then you have irony. If you are being asked about irony, you write what irony is, you try to define it in your own words. That would be even better. And provide at least 1 or 2 examples initially, and then say that there are different types of irony. And don't forget to mention Kenneth Brooks and his work Irony as a Principle of Structure, right? When you are talking about, or when you are writing about any answer on irony. So in this particular unit, you have 3 important topics: connotative, denotative, and to add few points to connotative, denotative, you can take help of information on page number 50. Okay. So whether it's a scientific language or literary language, whether a question is on scientific or literary language, or just denotative and connotative, you can make use of this. And there are some explanations given by William K. Wimsatt and I.A. Richards, which is available on page number 50, which you can add in your answer when you are writing on connotative and denotative. The third important topic is irony. Okay, so I think with this we shall close our today's class, and in the next class what we will do is we'll take up functions of literature. I have actually started with this one. We would have started actually with functions of literature, but what I realized if these small topics which could be covered in one lecture has 3 important concepts which are asked time and again in your examination. So I thought it appropriate to discuss these 3 important questions or concepts. I hope you understood it, and I hope you enjoyed this.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what we will do is yes. So we'll meet again in the next class, probably next week, right? And I urge you and I request you to revise the topics that you have already read, right? And try to make points about concept, about different types within that concept, right? And remember the people who contributed towards that concept. Okay, keep on preparing notes so that there is a saying that slow and steady wins the race. Nothing happens overnight, so don't expect that that miracle will happen in your case. No, that is not going to happen. Slowly but regularly, you refer your books, you refer your notes, try to prepare it and prepare yourself for the examination. So we'll meet next week. Till that time, goodbye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.